All right, good morning, friends. Welcome to Pathway Community Church here online on what is a very snowy Sunday morning here in Kitchener, Ontario, if you are catching this online from somewhere else. If you don't know me, my name is Daryl Buckle. I'm one of the pastors here at Pathway, and this Sunday we are kicking off a brand new teaching series, all on the Book of Ruth. So, what exactly is a teaching series? Let me explain that. At Pathway, we plan our series over the course of a year to make sure that we accomplish a number of things. First and foremost, we always want to help people who are looking to find Jesus. So throughout the year, we speak to our friends in the room who are still exploring maybe how God or how Jesus fits into their lives. Trying to answer the questions that people like them, real people, actually have. We want to help people overcome the challenges that we all face in this life. But we also want to help those of us in the room who already know Jesus, who already been cultivating a relationship with God, to grow deeper, to step into God's purpose in a more meaningful way in our lives. What N.T. Wright calls their vocation, our vocation as followers of Christ. So we do that. Around Pathway, we talk about Jesus a lot, because if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. We teach the scriptures because we believe that the whole scriptures point to him. The Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, pointing forward to the coming of the promised Messiah. The Christian scripture, the New Testament, pointing back to the day of his coming, his death, burial, and resurrection. And we look forward to the day when he, as the hymns say, shall come again. We want you to know Jesus. We want you to enjoy the life he came to bring, no matter how new or old you feel to the faith journey. Our hope, of course, is that every series, every message help you understand what it means to take another step toward Jesus, and maybe inspires you to do that, to take steps of faith in your life. Because we believe knowing Jesus changes every part of life. So like I said, this morning we are kicking off a teaching series on the Book of Ruth. Ruth is one of just two books in the Hebrew scriptures named after a woman. Unapologetically, gentlemen, we need our sisters around us to help guide and interpret this text for us. This is, after all, a story of courage and resilience that has secrets to tell you about how to overcome challenges in your life, but it's told by a strong female lead. It's going to be fantastic. Like I said, the goals of a teaching series are different when compared to maybe some of the other types of series that we do. We think that by digging more deeply into the Book of Ruth, you're going to be introduced to people and perspectives, not to mention cultures that you may not know a lot about. You're going to go get some lessons in history. You're going to learn to think like a historian. Does everybody remember the Golden Girls from TV way back in, I guess, my era? Blanche, Sophia, Dorothy, and Rose. Ah, yes, the Golden Girls. Yeah, if you think the Golden Girls is a series about a group of senior ladies, you got another thing coming. It might surprise you to learn that other than Sophia, who was 79 when the series started, I'm going to mess with some of your heads right now. Blanche, Dorothy, and Rose were all between 53 and 55 when the series started. Yeah, I know. Don't hate the messenger. This is just a reminder that some of our ideas or the images that we conjure in our minds when we try to imagine what life was like in the, olden days or the golden years or at a different point in history might not actually reflect reality, historically speaking. And that is so true when we read the Old Testament. Friends, the world of the Old Testament is a strange one to those of us who live in the 21st century, to those of us who live in the West especially. So when we approach the scriptures, books like Ruth, anything in the Old Testament, we have to approach it with both curiosity and with humility, okay? So we're going to practice thinking like historians if we can. Although, I should say, the Book of Ruth is not history. Daryl, it's not? Well, The Book of Ruth is what we call an historical narrative. The difference between historical narrative and history is the same as the difference between 300 and the actual Spartans, right? Braveheart and anything that actually happened in Scotland, and not to leave out you ladies. This is why you love Little House on the Prairie and Bridgerton and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies more than grade 9 history. Because historical narratives are stories. They occurred in history, in real places, but they are written with a theological purpose. Biblical historical narratives were written with a theological purpose. So these stories or narratives are not merely records of past events, as you might think of history, like you learned it in school. They are interpreted history, meaning they're stories intentionally shaped to reveal divine truths, illustrate God's actions, and to how that all fits into the overarching story of redemption in the scriptures. So if you're thinking about the two of them, the kind of history you learned in school, modern historical method uses sources, primary and secondary sources like letters and artifacts and government records that you'd get at the archives, and then critically evaluates their reliability and their context, and then tells or documents the story of history as best as the researcher can. Biblical historical narrative often relies on oral traditions, divine inspiration, and unapologetically has selective storytelling or point of view to convey a message or a moral. So it just reads differently, and it must be read differently. So in my research for this kind of section of the message, someone suggested that one of the skills that modern readers needs to practice when reading narrative portions of the Bible is the skill of recognizing or embracing the difference between explicit and implicit communication. You guys know what I'm talking about? Sure you do. Explicit communication is when your wife says, Daryl, would you please load the dishwasher? Stated directly, kind of self-explanatory, but if you're a guy, you know it's a trap. Implicit communication is your wife says, Daryl, would you please load the dishwasher, please? But what she means is, Daryl, would you please load the dishwasher like I would load the dishwasher, being careful to note that only 10% of our mugs are dishwasher safe, and the other 90, which constitutes my favorite and preferred mugs, also need to be washed, dried, and put away. Make sure that you wash up any dishes that don't fit or don't belong in the dishwasher, and please make sure that you wipe the countertop when you're done. Yeah. Indirectly stated. Listen, implied but no less important to understand the text. Now you're getting it, the difference between explicit and implicit communication. So when reading historical narrative, you learn to look for the things being said, not just explicitly, do this, don't do that, but details that are implied or buried just below the surface, but no less important to the story. The subtext. Make sense? Let me show you what I mean. Right from Ruth chapter 1, you can follow along online on the YouVersion Bible app or in your Bible. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1 begins with this. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Like, boom! Right there. I know. There is a lot of story in that one verse. Yeah, I know some of you are automatically just going to start doing the math, right? The days when the judges ruled. Daryl, wasn't that 1400 to 1350 BC, kind of from the death of Joshua right up to the coronation of Saul as Israel's first king, kind of 1050, 1010? Okay, sure. That might be true, but it might not be what the author intended for you to understand when they said that. Yeah, some of you know. In the days when the judges ruled. Okay, that's the best I've got. If you've read Judges, you know that there is one statement that captures explicitly what the first verse of Ruth communicated perhaps implicitly about what life was like during the time of the Judges. Does anyone know it in your head? Yeah, verse 25, chapter 21 of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just imagine what it would be like to live in a world where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Like picture the Wild West or picture Mad Max. Really, Buckle, Mad Max? Have you ever read the book of Judges? Friends, in the last chapter of Judges, right before it says, in that time there was no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes, it tells like the most horrific story captured perhaps in the scriptures. If you were to read it now, you would miss everything else that got said today. If you read it, if you take a minute this week and read it, you will have a pit in your stomach. You might even start to feel sick to your stomach. Some of you, that feeling in your stomach might be hard to shake. If you know the story, you have that pit in your stomach right now, and it's that feeling in your stomach that you need if you're going to understand the time of the Judges and what the author of the book of Ruth wanted you to be feeling from the very first verse of the book of Ruth. And to make matters worse, there's also a famine in the land. Yeah, now when I say that, some of you are just going to automatically think, wow, that must have been hard, right? Because most of us in the West have never experienced famine. Most of us, by God's grace, have never experienced food insecurity. And I can imagine that it's hard. But famine in the story of Ruth is almost surely part of a larger narrative arc that the author expects that their original audience would have understood right away. Let me just flesh that out. Once upon a time, right? There's this cute little village full of cute little shops named Bethlehem. Bethlehem means the house of bread. Everyone loved their home in Bethlehem because Bethlehem was the place to which God had led them, the place that God had blessed them. So no one ever even thought of moving out of town or away from home. I mean, why would you? Bethlehem was the place of God's blessing, the place where they might expect God to bless, like an oasis in a scary world. Until one day a great famine came to the house of bread, and the people became desperate. You following, right? This is the narrative arc of the story of Ruth. Bethlehem is home. Home is good until famine comes and things go from good to bad. And so you make an impossible choice. You decide to leave home. But that's when things go from bad to worse. Yeah, I know. And of course, God is still faithful through the challenges and the storm. If you stay faithful to him, that's right. He will bring you home. You'll live happily ever after, yada, yada, yada. And listen, when I characterize it that way, I am not suggesting that Ruth isn't real or didn't happen. I am saying that in storytelling cultures, it is helpful to trace the arc of the story to capture some of the implicit teaching in the story. And if you're a Jew, you know that every story has meaning, is rich and ripe with meaning. And the mention of famine, if you're a Jew, awakens memories. Yeah, in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. If you're a Jew, you remember Genesis chapter 12, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your people and your father's household to the land that I will show you. And so Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. And so he builds an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And Abram continues to explore this land that God has promised to give him and his descendants, right? This is their culture. This is the story of the patriarchs, their fathers of the faith. In verse 10, same chapter, there's a turning point in Abram's story. Anyone want to guess? Yeah, chapter 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while. Same word, sojourning, because the famine was severe. Man, that sounds familiar, right? We'll get a little of this. Genesis 26, during the time of Isaac, it says, now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And then, but it says in verse 2, the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt, but live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land, Isaac, for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. Daryl, I thought this was a series on the Book of Ruth. Like it is! But that's the thing about a great story. It reminds us of the places that you've been, lessons that you've learned from your own story. And maybe they forgot that God has already proven himself faithful in seasons of famine before. Maybe they lost themselves. They started to doubt that God would take care of them in the same way that he took care of generations before them. And there might be a message or messages a little under the surface for you too as we read the Book of Ruth. But in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, which means, by the way, my God is king. And his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. A little foreshadowing in there. Mahlon means sickly, Chilion means terminally ill. And they were Ephrathites, from Bethlehem in Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Another example even of names that are rich with meaning, even though they're names which I have a hard time pronouncing. There's a famine in Bethlehem, which means house of bread. So the Ephrathites, which means fruitful, feeling blessed, never stressed, go to Moab to live. Oh, you guys get the point. Not Moab, Buckle. Not Moab. Moab's a place of shame. If you know the story, Moab was the son of one of Lot's daughters. Like, that is a messed up story. The Moabites, you gotta know, were hated. There were laws for the Jews against the Moabites. No Moabite or Ammonite nor their descendants up to the 10th generation may enter the assembly of the Lord. I'm talking long-standing feuds. It was the Moabites who failed to provide bread and water to the Israelites during their exodus from Egypt. These are old grudges. You remember the story of Balaam's ass? Yeah, hired by the Moabites to curse Israel. This was not a playful rivalry. The Israelites were commanded in Deuteronomy 23:6 not to seek peace or prosperity for the Moabites, like forever and for all of their days. There has never been a more wretched hive of scum and villainy as Moab. You gotta know, and Ruth 1 says, a famine drives our heroes just for a while. I mean, just for a while to Moab. But just one verse later, the for a while is dropped and it appears like they're staying. And I just highlight that because sometimes one compromise turns into a habit of compromise. One bad decision turns into a whole season of bad decisions. I know I'm talking to someone. Next thing you know, things go from bad to worse. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And she was left with her 2 sons. That's verse 3. Unbelievable, right? It's terrible. At this point, they could have just gone home, back to their people, but there was a famine back home, and people have got to eat. So Naomi's sons, right, married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other, not Oprah, Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there for 10 years, wait, what? Yeah, 10 long years in Moab when this happens. Verse 5, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons, without her husband. What started out as a temporary concession in a season of desperation became a decade of displacement. And now, honestly, friends, heartbreak. Heartbreak. Now, I want to be very careful to communicate this well. It is impossible to know, and it is fruitless to try to understand why God sometimes leads and sometimes he let us lead ourselves down all sorts of difficult roads. Yeah, sometimes he leads and sometimes he lets us walk down paths of our own choosing. Paths that lead us away from places where God himself had brought us, had intended to bless us in those places. And there are few things worse or few things that hurt more than what I call attribution errors, right? Attribution errors are where people try to blame God for the mess I got my own sorry self into, or when I take credit for blessing that I had really very little to do with. Attribution errors. This is one of the themes that you have to wrestle with in the Book of Ruth. Sometimes people try to blame everything that happens on an active and intentional sovereign plan of God, when really, if you had asked God, he would have told you, do not go down that street. And in Ruth, you are reading from Naomi's point of view, not necessarily God's. So as we read the Book of Ruth through the eyes of its original audience, it is a very familiar story to some people trying to find meaning when it felt like their lives were becoming a bit of a dumpster fire. Yeah, I'm just saying it is wise to be careful when asking, where is God in your dumpster fire? There's an old poem that says, the rain, it falls on the just and on the unjust fella, but mostly on the just, because the unjust stole the just's umbrella. Yeah, just know that they're asking the same questions that you do, right? Where is God in this storm? So Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem, essentially. Verse 6 says that Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. The King James says Naomi hears that Yahweh has visited his people with bread. I love that. So she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home. Verse 6, Naomi credits God himself as the reason there is once again bread in Bethlehem, when there was nothing but hurt and hardship in Moab. So with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and sets out down the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So then Naomi says to her 2 daughters-in-law, you should go back, each of you, to your mother's home, and may the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. And then she kissed them goodbye. And it says they wept aloud and said to her, why? We want to go with you. We'll just go back to you and to your people. But Naomi says, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? And when she says this, if you don't know, this is a bit of a window into the social structure of Israel at that time. If your husband died, one of his brothers could redeem a bad situation, essentially, by taking you as a wife. And this was how they cared for, and this is how they ensured the succession of future generations, which was culturally important, critically important in that time. So she says, return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband, even if I thought it were still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons. Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters-in-law. It's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me, she said. And at this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and left. But Ruth, it says, clung to her. That's the word, the same word as cleave in Genesis chapter 1 with Adam and Eve. Husband and wife will cleave to one another. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. You should do the same. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, that's where I'm going to die too. And there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Yeah, unbelievable. When Naomi realizes that Ruth's determined to go, she stopped urging her. Any word nerds out there? Yeah, I'm a bit of a word nerd, and I married a German gal who was also a word nerd, so I'm going to share a few of my favorites. The first, Fernweh. Fernweh. It's an ache for far-off places. It's like a wanderlust, but it's a feeling of being homesick for places you've never been before. That's a cool word, right? Yeah, how about this one? The German word for being blessed with special privileges, extraverst. Yeah, that's true. Extraverst, meaning extra sausage. Yeah, that's right. You get a second sausage. How blessed can you be? How about this one? Hupfgalt. You know what Hupfgalt is? It's your muffin top, your love handles. It means hip gold. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. This is my favorite, Drachenfutter. Yeah, it's a gift presented to your spouse by way of apology. And if you can't guess, it means dragon food. I'm not making it up. That's the Germans. They have a way with words. Friends, words have power, don't they? Yeah, listen, after all that has happened to get them from Bethlehem to the fields of Moab and then back again, Naomi, wanting to free her daughters from any familial obligations to care for her, tries to convince them, to go on their way and to go back to their home. And she says, and she prays, may the Lord show you kindness as you have shown me. Kindness to your dead husbands, kindness to me. And that word translated kindness is the word hesed. Hesed is an incredible word. It's a picture of the type of love that's displayed through covenant loyalty and faithfulness and devotion and kindness. The majority of times the word hesed is used throughout the Old Testament. It's translated as mercy. Yeah, mercy, because hesed is a faithful love and kindness that's not given based on merit, that you have to earn or could even earn. Hesed's a love that's freely given, the kind of love you need to redeem a dumpster fire of a situation, the kind of love they make movies or great stories about, the kind of love where stories, or the kind of stories where other lesser kinds of loves fall short. That's Hesed, and it sounds familiar for those of us who follow Jesus, because Hesed is a self-emptying and almost cross-shaped kind of love, a love like Jesus. Yeah, is it kindness? Well, sure it is. And Naomi prays that the loving kindness of God would follow these girls all the way to their home and to their people. It is a breathtaking prayer in a moment like that. It's breathtaking. And don't forget, listen, Deuteronomy 23 verse 6 said, the Israelites were commanded never seek peace or prosperity for the Moabites all their days and forever. Yeah, this was a law-breaking prayer. It seems that there's a power greater than the law, a truth more steadfast, and it is that you do not stand in the way of the effectual, fervent prayer of a praying mama. Some of you know that well. Naomi, remember, was a broken woman, but all she could think about was protecting her daughters-in-law from experiencing their grief, more grief. All she wanted was the best for Orpah and Ruth, and that would come at her own expense. She would be alone to make her way, to find her way again. So she defied the law and prayed the covenant love and mercy and kindness of God on her daughters and on their families and on their futures. That's Hesed. self-sacrificial love. That's a love that covers over a multitude of sins. And on top of that, she prays, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Yeah, just like Isaiah prayed for the daughters of Jerusalem, though trials and judgments will surely come, my people, he said, will live in peaceful dwelling places, in secure homes, in undisturbed places of rest. Yeah, Naomi prays love and rest for her daughters-in-law. And when Ruth hears these words, something happens inside of her, right? The desires of her own broken heart got reordered, and she couldn't imagine leaving the family that she had found, the faith and friendship of her mother-in-law. Yeah, don't you ask me to leave and turn back from you. You said, don't even ask. Don't even think about it. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. That's Hesed. And it's inspiring, isn't it? Yeah, it's inspiring, especially for us, right? When everywhere you look is just one more person looking out for number one, or canceling anyone who doesn't meet our expectations or serve our agenda, right? When things aren't going away our way, we leave. In a culture where self is king, Ruth inspires us. In the days when the judges ruled, when everyone else was doing what they saw fit in their own eyes, Ruth inspires us to practice covenant love and loyalty, faithfulness, devotion, kindness, and mercy. It's awesome. It's awesome. And so these two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. Verse 19, when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, could this be Naomi back? Naomi, is that you? If you have notes in your Bible, you see that the name Naomi means pleasant. But after all she's been through, man, Naomi is a changed woman. Yeah, she's got scars. Maybe like some of you. Yeah, don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life bitter, very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Naomi's traumatized, right? She's got some deep hurts in her life. And from Naomi's point of view, from this traumatized point of view, it's the Lord who has brought all this misfortune on her. Again, I think that's an attribution error. But she thinks that God has judged her and that God is finished with her. But friends, this story is just getting started. In the last verse of chapter 1, verse 22, I'm telling you, it is a verse filled with, it's like a lifetime of detail and story and subtext. It says, so Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, who was her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem, listen to this, as the barley harvest was beginning. It seems that maybe that season of famine may be over for our heroes. Maybe the dumpster fire is going out. Let's pray.